mga kababayan at mga pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Ang Girl voice, male voice, lolly voice, monster voice.
Awesome! Awesome! Awesome!
Okay, tingnan natin ang time check natin sa gabi, sa umagang ito. Ayan. Alas 7, 50 minutos pasado po alas 7, no? 50 minutos sa pasado alas 7. Ano bang araw ito? 23 ata ng Mayo, 2024 mga suki, no? So, anong araw ngayon? Martes. Huwebes. Okay, Huwebes po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, magandang umaga. Good morning sa lahat. Okay, assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Okay, nandito naman tayo sa regular program natin pang umaga. Okay. Sa programa pa rin ng Consolidated News. Okay, para sa inyo mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, dito lang sa platform ng channel ng ADLSN TV News Online. Okay, corporation. Kumusta kayo mga taga-Masid, no? Okay, shoutout na lang sa inyo. Okay, sa lahat-lahat na hindi ko na lang isa-isahin. Shoutout na lang sa inyo lahat mga suki, no? Mapa-local man, mapa-national, at saka itong mga ibayong dagat. Okay, binabati ko na, okay, ng pagbati natin, no? Okay, ayaw daw ng ni Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu po ay i-reconstruct yung sinira nila po dyan po sa ilalim ng Gaza Strip at saka itong parte po ng West Bank and then sa Rafah border. Ayaw po niya i-construct, no? Reconstruction po ng mga damage yan, collateral damage. Ayaw po, no? Pabayaan daw niya mga Arab League, okay, the international community ay gumawa yan. Talagang salot sa daigdig ito si Benjamin Netanyahu, no? Okay, salot talaga. At saka gumawa ng mga gera yan, salot. Okay, sa daigdig mga suki, mga kababayan, no? And then sirain mo yung mga building, mga residential, and then pabayaan mo lang mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Wala po sa kahit saan batas. Okay. Wala po mga suki, no? Talagang i-disobey niya ang mga batas po tumama sa kanya, no? Okay. Katulad itong kaso ng genocide, talagang para sa kanya baliwala mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Okay, pakinggan natin bakit ayaw niya po gawain itong mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Okay. Sandali lang. Okay, puntahan natin yon. Ay, grabe pumasok yun, no? Ito na. Sige. Grabe.
Now with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never in the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never on the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never on the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never on the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never on the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin...
Okay, tama na po mga suki. 3 beses na, no? Can you imagine that? Okay, dinurog-durog niya ang bansang Palestino, itong Gaza Strip. Okay, totally almost all damaged po. Okay, and then Benjamin Netanyahu resists, okay, to reconstruct that collateral damage, no? So, saan ka sa mundo po mga suki makarinig ng ganito mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, sa bansang Israel lang. Okay, ganun po. Okay, kasalot nila sa daigdig mga suki, mga kababayan. Salot ng daigdig. Ayan. So, paano na yan? Saan titira po yung mga civilian? Namatayan pa, maging 35,000, and then ay malapit ata 80,000 po sugatan mga suki, mga kababayan, no? So, paano na yan? Sino po mag-sorder, okay, ng pondo, expenses, okay, sa bansang Palestino, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay. So, yan po ang situation. Okay, itong nangyari po, bakbakan po dyan sa between Hamas resistance at saka itong Israeli government, mga suki, no? Okay, kawawa naman. Okay, marami pang namatay, marami pang casualty, marami pang collateral damage. Sana kaya ang puso natin, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, assalamualaikum. Prosecutor Karim Khan, no? Okay, assalamualaikum. Okay, what do you think with the situation of Palestinian people, no? Okay, so when you issue, okay, the arrest warrant, Honorable Prosecutor Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court, no? When you issue, okay, the arrest warrant, no? Okay, to these two people, et al. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, no? When you issue the arrest warrant. Okay, I will address, okay, to Honorable Prosecutor of the ICC, okay, Karim Khan, mga suki, no? Okay, para makita natin maghimas po ng malamig na stainless o kaya bakal, and then ipagsama po ng mga kabilang panig po. Doon na silang magsuntukan po sa loob ng cell na yan. Itong mga Ismail Haniyeh, okay, yung political bureau ng Hamas assistant at saka itong, sino ba yun? Si Hamdam. Okay, tatlo yun leader po ng Hamas. Doon na lang ipagsama. Okay, nila Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and et al. Yung mga war criminal, yung mga gumagawa po ng hatred diyan po sa loob ng Israel, no? Kaya nagkaganyan yan. Gusto ko pinagsama doon sa isang cell, and then doon sila magbukbukan para matapos na sila lahat, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Itong si Benjamin Netanyahu, magbukbukan sila doon, magsuntukan po sa loob ng cell, no? Okay, pati si Gallant. And then sa kay Hamas naman, ipasok din doon. Okay, kasi yun naman ang gusto ni International Prosecutor Karim Khan, no? And then box each other, no? Okay, in one cell. Okay, sa Hague, Netherlands, mga suki, mga kumang. Ang gandang makita mo ng ganun, no? And then namatay sila parehas. Okay, namatay na sila lahat. So wala na po problema ang daigdig, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Matay na sila lahat. Mga salot Ayan. Mga salot po, mga suki, no? Ayan. So, sige po, mga suki, no? Ang ganda yun Okay, pagsamahin sa isang cell, and then magbukbukan sila hanggang mamatay sila. Ay, napaganda, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Maganda pakinggan po ng global citizen kung nangyari po ganun, mga suki, no? Okay. So, yan. Lahat ng magbigay ng salot. Kaya nga itong ICJ, okay, at saka ICC, dapat po manatili, mga suki, no? Okay, yung mga mag-abuse sa kapangyarihan, okay, isuplong doon. Yung mga leader mag-abuse sa kapangyarihan, okay, isuplong po doon sa kulungan yun, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, napaka. So, sige po, mga suki, no? Napakasama ni Abdul Jaman Damahan, no? Tama naman. Okay, sa ngalan po ng kapayapaan, tama ako. Okay, ikulong yan, suplong yan. Ayan. Okay, assalamualaikum. Okay, Honorable Prosecutor Karim Khan, mga suki, no? Ayan. Sana may ngipin ng opisina niya. Ayan. So, tama ako.
Female voice.
Okay, ang sunod parinig ko, itong about Nakba, no? Okay, yung nangyari po sa kasaysayan po ng Palestina, no? Sabi po ng ambassador ng Israeli, okay, to the UN ata ito, okay, ang Nakba daw hindi even structure daw mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Pakinggan natin. Sa ngalan po ng patas na pamamahayag, hindi lang kabilang panig ang parinig mo, lahat parinigin mo rito sa programa mga suki, no? Okay, Nakba. Galing po sa United Nations ito, no?
Determined as a risk of irreparable harm to their right to be protected from genocide. It is as though the Palestinian people have been made to endure an endless Calvary, as Edward Said once put it, incessant, unremitting, unforgiving. As we gather to mark 76 years of Nakba, under the
Okay. Yung bagtad, no? Ang Nakba daw is a structure, not an event, no? Okay, so okay, pakinggan natin. Ambassador ba ito ng ng Israeli o hindi? Professor o author? Pakinggan natin, no?
long shadow of Gaza, the theme of continuity is ever present. What the Palestinian people has been enduring for 3/4 of a century, uniquely on full display in real time on social media feeds as we speak, is a singular experience of unmitigated disaster, of the sustained and concerted effort to do away with their collective and national existence in their native land. The Nakba continues because it is the logical culmination of Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine, which has yet to complete its task, with its insatiable desire to displace and replace Palestine's natives, as foretold and proclaimed openly by its founding fathers, institutions, and present-day adherents. As Patrick Wolf has noted, settler colonialism
Professor Ataya, no?
involves, quote, a logic of elimination. This logic strives for the dissolution of native societies while it erects new colonial societies in their place. In this sense, settler colonizers come to stay, with invasion and colonizing constituting, in Wolf's words, a structure, not an event. Your Excellencies, the Nakba is a structure, not an event. This structure is in overdrive as we speak, with a pace and fervor never before seen. It is happening publicly, its authors openly admit its aims, and yet little to nothing is being done to stop it by those in position to do so. It is being actively colluded in by a small number of Western states and political elites, led by the United States. It has cast doubt, serious doubt, over the continued viability of the post-World War II international legal order. These Western states have fashioned all manner.
Okay, ang Nakba kasi nangyari after World War II, no? Okay. Ayan, 19, ano ba ito? Basta pasado po 1940 plus. Nakalimutan ko lang exact year. Okay, itong Nakba. Sige.
Of Orwellian justifications for their collusion with the Nakba in Gaza. Whether nonsensical arguments about Israel's
Parang ganun na, parang mga genocide din, mga ethnic cleansing ang style ng Nakba. Salitang Arabic itong Nakba. Ayan. Sige. Sige po.
so-called right of self-defense, dismissed by the International Court of Justice 20 years ago, or Israel's purported purity of arms, belied by countless TikTok videos of sadistic IDF soldiers on the ground, or acquiescence in spurious Israeli allegations or claims that UNRWA, the life-giving, life-saving humanitarian arm of the United Nations in Gaza, was somehow involved in 7 October, now debunked by a high-level independent review panel, if any was ever needed. The voluminousness of these Western justifications is rooted in one simple truth that runs like a thread throughout. The consistent denial of...
Okay, break ko muna para naman na nakatulong po ang programa natin, no?
Male voice, lolly voice, monster voice. Female voice.
Okay, tungkol po sa nakba yun, no? Sige. Continue na natin itong explanation po ng isang author ata ito, no?
The very humanity, agency, and political rights of the Palestinian people. A people for whom the United Nations has a permanent responsibility until their plight is resolved in accordance with international law. The UN's permanent responsibility for the question of Palestine is often spoken of in these hallowed halls, but what is not spoken of as often or at all are the reasons as to why this responsibility actually exists. And for that, it is essential to discuss the fateful decision made by the then Western-dominated United Nations General Assembly to recommend partition of Palestine against the will of the country's indigenous population, the majority population, through Resolution 181 of 29 November 1947.
1947.
A review of the terms of the partition plan and the accompanying UN record, recounted in my recently published book on the United Nations and the question of Palestine, reveals that the plan was illegal under prevailing international law. This illegality helped lay the groundwork for the Nakba of 1948 and its painfully unjust results that have continued and indeed accelerated ever since remain with us. Your Excellencies, as many of you know, Resolution 181 provided for the partition of Palestine into an Arab state and a Jewish state in economic union, with the city of Jerusalem and its environs established as a corpus separatum. Both states were required to adopt democratic constitutions, establish government on the basis of universal suffrage, and guarantee to all persons equality before the law. Sounds good, doesn't it? But by any objective assessment, the terms of the partition plan revealed an absolute contempt for the principle of self-determination of peoples as applied to Palestine as a Class A mandated territory, rooted upon the idea, which you will all recognize, of majority democratic rule. Territorially, the plan allotted the Jewish state 57% of Palestine, including its most fertile land, despite the Jewish settler population comprising only 1/3 of the country, and possessing only 5.6% of registered land ownership. Demographically, although the proposed Arab state would include a clear majority of approximately 725,000 Arabs to 10,000 Jews, the proposed Jewish state would contain a total population of 1,080,000, consisting of 509,000 Arabs to 499,000 Jews. And this meant that based on the United Nations record, minority rule would prevail in the purported Jewish state from the outset. This, despite the terms of Resolution 181 requiring that the proposed Jewish state be democratic, ensure universal suffrage, and guarantee equality before the law. The UN partition plan was a glaring anomaly under prevailing international law. As I outline in my book, only 2 courses of action were legally open to the Assembly at the time. First, immediate independence of the whole of Palestine, in line, oh shock and horror of it, with the wishes of the majority of its inhabitants. Or second, UN trusteeship. Put simply, if the new UN charter system was to prevail, partition could never be legal without the freely expressed consent of the government. The UN record demonstrates that partition was not based on these international legal considerations. Rather, it was driven by hegemonic European states and their settler colonial affiliates for political reasons. The UN record shows that the declared goal of these states was to rectify Europe's centuries-old Jewish question in the wake of the Holocaust, and to do so at the expense of the innocent third-party Palestinians. As noted by the permanent representative of Yemen at the time, quote, "If Jews were persecuted in Europe, what have the people of Palestine to do with that?" End quote. The UN record demonstrates that partition was accompanied by a complete contempt for principles of self-determination and democratic governance as applied to Palestine as a Class A mandated territory. For instance, in its majority report recommending partition to the Assembly, the UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, expressly noted, and I quote, "With regard to the principle of self-determination, although international recognition was extended to this principle at the end of the First World War, and it was adhered to with regard to the other Arab territories at the time of the creation of the A mandates, it was not applied to Palestine, obviously because of the intention to make possible the creation of the Jewish national home there. Actually, it may well be said that the Jewish national home and the sui generis mandate for Palestine run counter to that principle," end quote, run counter to the principle of self-determination. Astoundingly, none of this gave the UNSCOP majority reason for pause. The support of partition came from one of UNSCOP's members, who unabashedly asserted on the floor of the General Assembly on 10 October 1947, and I quote, "Palestine was no more Arab than certain Spanish countries of Latin America were Indian. The Jews had made a pleasant and healthy country out of a land in which a sparse and rachitic population had merely vegetated. It was incomprehensible that the Arabs should adduce their numerical superiority as an argument. An ignorant majority should not be allowed to impose its will," end quote. An ignorant majority should not be allowed to impose its will, end quote. Your Excellencies, one could go on, but you get the point. For the Western-dominated UN, at the time of course, the Palestinian people did not matter when it came to the application of international law in 1947. Their claims, let alone their existence, were not taken seriously by the Western power. Like all colonial peoples, they were treated with racist contempt, and as a mere impediment to more noble European interests that were to be pursued, come what may. Why, one might ask, does any of this matter when we speak of the 1948 Nakba and the UN's permanent responsibility for the question of Palestine? Well, the UN record shows that UNSCOP and the Western-dominated General Assembly suffered from a cognitive dissonance as to the inevitability of violence befalling Palestine and its people following the passage of the partition plan. We now know from the UN record that the 1948 Nakba.
Okay, what they think, no? Itong mga organization ba? Okay, yung mga organization sa sa Western, sa mga European, okay, European Union, akala na nila hindi maintindihan natin mga ginagawa nila. Itong mga Western nation civilization. Taga-Western man tayo. Akala nila ang ginagawa nila hindi natin maintindihan. Okay, kamali sila. Okay, naintindihan natin itong mga ginagawa nila mga suki sa pang-api, katulad ng mga Palestino. Okay, naintindihan natin yon. Okay, sa pamagitan po pag-research natin, pag-aaral natin, naintindihan natin lahat yan mga suki, no? Okay, kung mag-research ka, magbasa ka ng magbasa, maintindihan mo ang situation, no? Okay, so ano akala ng mga taga-West, taga-mga European Union, yung mga tao mang-api ba? Okay, mangkangkam lang, kam-kam, mangkuha lang. So, ayan po mga suki, no? Ayan, mangagaw lang. Ayan, naintindihan natin lahat yun mga suki, no? Okay, sa pamagitan po ng communication, mga libro, binabasa natin araw-araw, okay, gabi-gabi. Ayan po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Naintindihan natin lahat ang situation po ng daigdig, bakit nagkaganito. Ayan, sige.
Consisted of innumerable acts of widespread, premeditated, and systematic violence aimed at expelling or encouraging the mass flight of the indigenous Palestinian population from the country. These acts included the wholesale and indiscriminate bombardment, siege, and expulsion of the Palestinian population from cities, towns, and villages. At least 31 confirmed massacres of Palestinian civilians, including use of mass graves as means of concealment, rape, and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence, psychological terror campaigns broadcasting horrors to befall the population if it did not flee, biological warfare, and a host of scorched earth tactics, including the deliberate destruction of between 392 and 418 Palestinian villages, whence at least half the refugees were expelled. And as the ethnic cleansing was unfolding, and well before the last armistice agreement was signed in 1949, the new state of Israel consolidated its conquest, seizing, looting, and settling Palestine refugees and state property. On the eve of the Zionist offensives in April 1948, David Ben-Gurion, who would become Israel's first prime minister, said, quote, "We shall enter the empty villages and settle in them. In peacetime, we would not have been able to do this." End quote. Accordingly, about 135 new Jewish settlements were established during the 1948 war, most of which on Arab-owned land, including dozens on territory earmarked by the UN partition plan for the Palestinian Arab state. Tens of thousands of new Jewish settlers were moved in by Israel into Palestinian refugee houses that remain intact. They and their descendants remain in that property to this day. It is therefore not without reason that when Israeli leaders now call for the resettlement of the Gaza Strip in the heat of battle, the people of Palestine shudder in fear of what is to come. Your Excellencies, Palestine's initial ethnic cleansing in the 1948 Nakba was consolidated by an Israeli cabinet decision of 16 June of that year to bar return of the Palestinian refugees to their property and their homes. And this was followed by various administrative acts, including the blocking of Palestinian refugee bank accounts and the passage of legislation in Israel aimed at giving the imprimatur of legality to it all. Israel's ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian refugees, its wholesale dispossession and usurpation of their property, its mass denationalization of that population, and its denial of the right of those refugees to return and restitution constitute gross and systematic violations of relevant international law which continue to the present day. For almost 8 decades, they have been compounded by myriad actions of Israel, administrative, legislative, judicial, and now military, all of which have been animated by what Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem has declared is a regime of Jewish supremacy, their words, not mine, between the river and the sea. An apartheid regime, friends. Literally no facet of Palestinian life has been left untouched. Which brings us to the Nakba of today. Even before 7 October, Gaza had been shorn by Israel of anything remotely capable of sustaining a dignified life for one person, let alone 2.3 million. 56 years of illegal Israeli military occupation, compounded by 16 years of Israeli blockade, multiple Israeli military assaults resulting in tens of thousands of casualties, including the killing and maiming of thousands of children. A multi-decade process of de-development and de-industrialization, resulting in a 45% unemployment rate and a 60% poverty rate, with 80% of the population dependent on some form of international assistance. 97% of drinking water unfit for human consumption, and a healthcare system on its last legs for having been suffocated by the blockade. All of that before.
Okay, very sentimental, no? Ang kasaysayan po ng mga Palestino po sa kanilang lugar, sa kanilang bayan po mga suki. Sana break mo lang muna ako, no? Okay.
Male voice, lolly voice, monster voice, female voice.
Okay, patuloy natin po ang research ng isang matalinong tao po tungkol sa Nakba, no? Isang professor ito. Ayan. Saan nagtrabaho sa UN? Ayan.
Or 7 October. All this to say, and as noted by the Secretary General on 25 October, the events of 7 October did not happen in a vacuum. Since that fateful day, Israel has deployed a level of violence not seen anywhere this century. Total war has descended upon Gaza. According to the United Nations, approximately 35,000 Palestinians have been killed so far, 2/3 of whom women and children, and another 78,000 are injured, many for life. A further 1.7 million, that's almost 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip, have been forcibly displaced with indiscriminate bombardment, yet again, scorched earth tactics and starvation as a tool of war deployed against them. Humanitarian aid is in frighteningly short supply, as objects indispensable for the survival of the civilian population continue to be arbitrarily withheld by the occupying power. Life-saving medicines, anesthetics, food, fuel, water, electricity. According to the International Court of Justice, famine is setting in Gaza, and, as mentioned, there is a risk of irreparable harm to Palestinian rights to be protected from genocide. Gaza, a place I once called home.
Okay, wala nata, no? Okay,
Is hewn ground to dust.
Meron pa.
No place is safe. No home, no hovel, no refugee camp, no hospital, no school, no UN shelter. Not in the north. Not in the middle, not in the south. Nowhere. I've often wondered what I would have done had I lived during the time of the 1948 Nakba. Would I have acted on my conscience to stop the atrocities unfolding before me? Or would I have remained silent as much of the world did? It would appear that fate has now ironically presented us all, dear friends, comrades, with such a moment in Gaza. Israeli leaders are now openly boasting that Gaza is, quote, rolling out the Gaza Nekba. Forgive me, that Israel is now rolling out the Gaza Nekba. Their soldiers are planting flags in Gaza beaches, vowing to re-establish Israeli colonies there. But the world is watching. In the words of one sitting member of the ICJ, quote, "The alarm has now been sounded by the court. All the indicators of genocidal activities are flashing red in Gaza. An injunction has been served for ending the atrocities. The provisional measures indicated by the court are binding. They are not something that a state party to the convention is free to respect or to ignore according to its own pleasure. They must be implemented." End quote. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the question is, will they be implemented? It is clear that the answer to this has already been furnished by Israel, and that answer is no. Not when the court issued its first provisional measures order on 26 January, nor when it issued its last one on 28 March. Just as international law was trampled on in the 1948 Nekba, so too is it being trampled on in the 2024 Nekba. The historical record is clear. If change is to happen, it must come from elsewhere. And this means you. This means all of us. If the words "never again" are to mean anything, if these United Nations are to honor the legacy of those for whom those words were initially fashioned, we must summon the courage to apply them at all times and in all places, without fear or favor. If anything is clear, that time and that place is the Gaza ghetto. That time and that place is now. The people of Palestine demand nothing else and nothing less. Our humanity does too. Thank you.
Okay, break muna tayo, no? Thank you, Professor. Ayan.
Male voice, lolly voice, monster voice, female voice.
Okay. Awesome po ang results ng Nakba yun, no?
Awesome! 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 Awesome!
Okay, ang susunod na natin parinig. Okay, Palestinian statehood increasing recognition. Kahit kalahati lang, no? Kasi mga 10 minutos na lang ang nalalabi po sa oras ko, no? Okay, pakinggan natin ito. Galing po sa diyan po naka-base sa Qatar, no? Itong sikat na sikat po TV, cable TV mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Sige.
Norway, Ireland, and Spain announced that they will recognize an independent Palestinian state. Will other European nations follow suit? And what does this...
Okay, dito po ang pag-recognize po sa State of Palestine, 144 nation na, no? Latest ata ang mag-recognize po sa State of Palestine, no? Except mang itong mga kaalyado po ng Israel. Okay, itong mga US at saka itong mga sa European Union, mga suki, no? Okay, pakinggan natin ito. Ayan. Malaga po ito ng mga suki, no? Okay, sa kapayapaan po ng lahat. Kung maayos ito mga suki, no? Ayan.
Leading for Palestine's efforts to become a full member of the United Nations, this is Inside Story. welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Until now, most Western countries have maintained that they will formally recognize Palestinian statehood only at the end of the peace process with Israel. But after nearly 7 months of Israel's devastating war on Gaza that has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians, Norway, Ireland, and Spain say they won't wait any longer. The Irish Prime Minister drew parallels with his own country's declaration of independence from British rule. But the European Union is divided on the issue, and larger powers like France say it's not the right time to recognize a Palestinian state. And a U.S. veto still holds back Palestine's bid to gain full membership at the United Nations. So, what does this increasing recognition of Palestinian statehood mean? We'll put that to our guests in a moment. First, though, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Palestine, to be recognised as an independent state from the 28th of May by at least 3 more European countries.
Today, Ireland, Norway and Spain are announcing that we recognise the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision.
But on the ground, Israel has stepped up its bombardment across Gaza, a war that has killed more than 35,000 Palestinians and reduced much of the Strip to rubble.
Anerkjennelse av Palestina, recognition of Palestine, is in support of moderate forces that are on a retreating front in a protracted and cruel conflict. This is an investment in the only solution that can bring lasting peace in the Middle East, a two-state solution.
Adding that the two-state solution is best for both Palestinians and Israelis, and this is the only way to ensure peace in the region. And the demarcation line should be from the Armistice Agreement of 1949, with Jerusalem as the shared capital. It's thought other European countries will join suit, including Slovenia and Malta. Israel has responded with anger. It immediately recalled its ambassadors from Norway and Ireland.
Israel will not remain silent in the face of those undermining its sovereignty and endangering its security. Today's decision sends a message to the Palestinians and the world. Terrorism pays. These countries chose to reward Hamas and Iran by recognizing a Palestinian state.
While Palestinian officials have welcomed the decision.
I think I would be speaking on behalf of all Palestinian people in welcoming this wonderful act. It is a very important step in determining the right of the Palestinian people, our people, for self-determination. And also it is a blow up, it blows away a lot of the de facto facts that Israel has created through settlement building on the ground, confirming that Palestine today is a state under occupation.
The top prosecutor at the International Criminal Court is requesting arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and Defence Minister for the war on Gaza. He's also seeking warrants for the arrest of the top Hamas leaders for the October 7th attack on Israel. Reactions among Western leaders have been split on this, with the US and UK speaking out against the move, while the European Union says the ICC must be respected. Wednesday's decision by the European nations to recognise Palestine could create a split among Western allies and within major international organisations. But it gives Palestine another victory in its long journey to achieve full statehood. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
So let's bring in our guests. In Tel Aviv, Yossi Beilin, a former Israeli cabinet minister who initiated the Oslo peace process in 1982. In Barcelona, Julian Barnes-Dacey directs the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And in Ganway, in the UK, Colin Ross, a former British diplomat assigned to the United Nations, who resigned and founded the non-profit advisory group Independent Diplomat. A warm welcome to all of you. Yossi, I want to start with you. The Israeli government sees this as a deeply hostile move, as if recognizing Palestinian statehood somehow diminished Israel. Does it?
No. No way. I mean, had you asked me, I would have recognized this state too. I believe that there is no other and there is no better solution for both peoples than to have a two-state solution. In my view, it should be under an umbrella of a confederation of two independent and sovereign states, But the two-state solution is the basis for any solution between the two peoples, as long as you want to have a solution. If you don't want to have a solution, then no solution is acceptable by you. But to say that it is hurting Israel, I don't see how.
Why do you mention this idea of if you don't want a solution? Are you implying that the Israeli government doesn't want a solution?
There is no question that there are actually lunatics in this government. Not all of them, of course, but there is a group of lunatics which is holding all the others by their necks. And they of course, are against any solution with the Palestinians. And they do not allow any development.
Khan Ross, as a former diplomat, you once worked, we said it, at the UN. What you actually did at the time, and you've explained this on your Substack, was to try and increase Palestine's status at the United Nations. It was part of your diplomatic efforts there. So based on that experience, you woke up today and saw this news of recognition of Palestinian statehood, and you thought what?
I thought it was a positive step. I think it diminishes the diplomatic space for Israel. It shows very clearly that Israel's actions in Gaza have reduced its diplomatic credibility, have made it more isolated in the world. All of that is very positive, and I think it moves us towards a conversation about what kind of solution long-term there might be for the Israel-Palestine situation. It also underlines in my own mind that the only thing that will work to move Israel towards that kind of solution is international pressure, and serious international pressure, much, much more than we have seen up until now.
Julian, I want to ask you whether this recognition is going to build momentum for more recognition, but allow me a little bit of a preamble, some facts for our viewers here, because it's not the first time, far from it, that countries have made this kind of move. In fact, 143 of the 193 member states of the United Nations already recognize Palestine. Norway, Spain, and Ireland added to that group, that would be 146. Palestine is a member also of many international organizations, including UNESCO, the International Criminal Court, and Interpol. And this month, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to back Palestine's bid for full membership. But the US has consistently blocked it at the Security Council. So at the moment, Palestine remains a non-member UN observer state. That's its status. So back to that question. Does this recognition of statehood by 3 European countries at the same time, does that build momentum for more recognition?
Then it reflects the direction of travel. As you said in the lead-up there has been a whole series of kind of steps taken towards different levels of recognition. This is 3 quite important European countries coming out now, on top of the 9 EU member states that already recognise Palestine. I think it's very important that you have countries like France and even the UK putting this on the table now. I think there are others like Belgium and Slovenia in the EU who will also think of this decision. So clearly there is a lot of thinking about this. There is a recognition that something needs to change. The parties on the ground are stuck. The situation is kind of brutally entrenched in conflict, and there's a need to kind of establish a new equation. I think the real question is what comes alongside this. Sure, we have more European states moving in this direction. We see a large chunk of the global south more actively pushing for this, but is there a strategy to really take this forward in terms of putting the Israelis under more pressure to recognise the need for a political track, a two-state solution? Can this be used in a more meaningful way to kind of leverage political change and reform in the Palestinian system, which is also a necessary component of moving forward? So this is a symbolic step in many respects, but it's a first important step from the perspective of some key European states, and it could well kind of be the beginning process of more Europeans, and maybe even more important Europeans coming alongside this.
Yossi, your views on that. Is this the beginning of something? And if so, what is it the beginning of?
I'm not sure whether that is the beginning of something. I can tell you something about what happened in 1999. We had to end the negotiations towards the permanent agreement by May the 4th, 1999, according to the Oslo stages. Now, nothing happened on that date, and the Prime Minister on the Israeli side was somebody by the name of Bibi Netanyahu. and there were Palestinian leaders who said if by that date there is no development or nothing will happen, we will declare unilaterally a Palestinian state. And there were European countries who thought that they should follow that idea. And there was a Berlin conference in, I think, February 1999, in which the idea was to declare that if in few months there is no development, there will be a decision of the EU to support a Palestinian state. I went to Yasser Arafat and I talked with him about it. I was then in the opposition, and I asked him what does he think about it. And he said the following thing: you see, you have to know, it is important for me when the world supports the Palestinian cause. But what I'm worried about is that it is not enough. Namely, we already had, and I remember the number, 123 countries which recognize the Palestinian state since November 1988, when the Palestinians changed their mind about a two-state solution. Now, what I'm worried about is once the world recognizes the Palestinian state, the world will be satisfied with what it did and will not go ahead with that. It is not enough for me. What I need is peace with you. I need a two-state solution, but a real one. So I'm not sure that it helps me. That is exactly what Arafat told me then. I mean, it is not the same situation. 30 years or more passed since then, and of course we cannot compare it, but nevertheless one should remember something like that, meaning that even I think that even if today
so Arafat didn't want state to be an empty shell.
A good sign for the Palestinians, it will not be enough, and it might be a substitute for real stages, like pushing for peace, for real peace, pushing the two sides towards peace.
Julian Khan, I see you nodding. Sorry, go ahead. Let's do Khan first, just because the nodding was strongest there.
Well, I thought what Mr. Badlian said was very interesting and very true. I mean, I thought a lot about this, and I can't help but think that the diplomatic approach, the building up of resolutions demanding an end to the occupation, and indeed the strategy of pursuing recognition for Palestine, in one way this has been a failure for the Palestinians, because those things have not granted the Palestinians one single square inch of territory ever. It is the direct process between the Israelis and the Palestinians that have agreed that, but also actions by the Palestinians, such as the Intifada on the ground, that triggered Israel to actually engage in those processes. And I think that should give us some cause for reflection. It's very, very clear to me that the only thing that is going to drive us towards a two-state solution, or any political solution that guarantees the rights of the Palestinians as well as the Israelis at the end of it, is pressure on Israel. You can have the entire General Assembly recognize Palestine. You can give Palestine full membership of the UN. It will not give them control of the whole West Bank, control of Gaza, or an international system of administration of Jerusalem.
Julian?
Yeah, but I'm very much in agreement with all of that, and I think my sense is, and my question is this the beginning of some kind of European strategy or not? And I think what has been said by the two of the guests is exactly to the right point. In and of itself, recognition will do very little. And the question is whether there is an underlying strategy that can increase the pressure on Israel to take the necessary steps to move towards a political track. Whether the Europeans are prepared to roll up their sleeves and engage more honestly and more coherently in some of the steps that are needed to leverage Palestinian political reform. I mean, these are the key dimensions that will create the space or not for a process. I agree with Ghana that the question of international pressure and isolation is critical, not just for the Israeli government, but I think also for the Israeli public, in terms of showing them that there is no viable alternative if they want to be accepted and a stakeholder moving forward, but the same for the Palestinians, that they need to recognize that there is a viable alternative to armed resistance, but that also necessitates them now taking the steps to change and to reform their internal makeup, which has obviously been a huge handicap and offered Israel, in a sense, an easy pathway away from political talks for so long.
Okay, so I've asked all of you about statehood, and you've pretty much all answered by framing it in a wider context of negotiations, peace for push, and how do you get to a long-term solution. So in that case, Yossi, let me go back to you and ask you this. Because you were an initiator in the Oslo peace process 30 years ago, it failed, it didn't work, but it remains the most significant, most comprehensive push for peace in the history of this conflict. What lessons did you learn about that and about its failure that you think could potentially be applied today?
Well, I believe that the most important thing is that you can make peace if both sides are eager to make peace. I'm not sure about the third party. It may help. It may suggest ideas. I don't think that a third party is going to impose neither on the Palestinians, not on the Israelis, peace. And that in my view, the most important thing is that the Israeli government will change. I mean, if you have other people, and you have today an alternative in Israel, on the Palestinian side, with all the difficulties between Hamas and the PLO or Fatah, and the old age of the president, I think that President Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas is ready for peace. Is a big supporter of the two-state solution. I'm not waiting for his replacement, although
you're not expecting it to happen.
And he's a partner. He's a partner for I believe, even for Gantz. If you remember, Gantz as a defense minister invited him to his home in Israel, and there was a big fuss about how can you invite Abu Mazen to your home, but he did it. I believe that in Europe there is the experience and the knowledge which may help us a lot to get to the two-state solution. And regretfully, Europe was not involved in the last years. In the past, it was involved in 80 with the Venice Declaration, if you remember, and other things. In the last years, it did not happen.
So you're saying the major stumbling block here is the Israeli leadership, the current government that is in place, and what would need to happen for things to change in any kind of significant way would be for the Israeli political landscape really to change. But Julian, the leaders, whether it's Netanyahu, his coalition partners, they have zero incentive to call new elections. So, and we've been in this sort of stasis for several months, right? Because they could potentially lose seats and lose power if they call new elections. So we all sort of just cross our arms and wait for the clock to run out on this government, which won't be for several years?
Well, I defer very much to Yossi on his read on Israeli politics. I think it's clear that Netanyahu fears support of the government because of the kind of personal cost, not just in terms of him being forced from power, but potentially having to face new trials. So he's clearly desperate to stay in power. But I think there is also a big question for the moment of how much the alternatives will really offer a new pathway towards peace. Yossi has suggested that the Gantz is in a better place, and I think for most people, anyone but Netanyahu and his coalition would be in progress here. But from the outside, from outside of Israel, there is a strong sense that actually there is a degree of alignment amongst the main parties and amongst the wider population that now is not the time for peace with Palestinians, that there isn't desire, there isn't a willingness to move towards a two-state solution, and actually by beating the drums of war and the kind of right-wing rhetoric, you strengthen your political position. So I think there's a lot of hope in a new government. I think for a lot of us outside of Israel, there's a lot of concern and skepticism there, and hence the sense that actually a lot of this is going to have to involve increased international pressure on Israel to convince both the political elite and the wider population the way forward in terms of their own status in the world and their own relations with the West and the global South will be dependent on making the kind of willingness to move into towards the political track that others are asking. And of course, the US is tying that to a Saudi normalization deal, so they're doing that in their own way. But I think everyone is very much leaning into the idea now that you have to pressure the Israelis and you have to show them the cost in terms of isolation and non-deal making of the states if there is to be a shift here.
Kyle, if I bring statehood back into this conversation, there has been just a few days ago, 2 days ago, a very concrete, measurable impact of the recognition of Palestinian statehood. And it is when the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court sought arrest warrants against Hamas leaders, yes, but also Israeli leaders, mainly the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister. That could not have happened, and he could not be seeking those arrest warrants if Palestine had not been recognized as a member state of the court. So this is one direct, clear, impactful way in which statehood does move the needle.
That's totally right. Without statehood, we wouldn't have the ICC called for prosecution. But this kind of incrementalist approach of seeking greater international recognition, membership of UN bodies, international bodies, that kind of thing, is all very well. It's a good strategy to pursue, but it will not give Palestine an actual state. What gives you a state is the country from which you want to become a state, secede from, if you like, though Palestine is not seceding from it, I'm just using a figure of speech, not seceding from Israel, has to accept that you will become a state. Israel holds the key here. This is why there is, as Julian says, growing international consensus that there needs to be pressure on Israel to make this happen. My question is, will there be such pressure? The Europeans have totally failed to put pressure on Israel in past decades to leave the occupied territories as they have been required to do for a very long time. And the US, when talks have happened, have taken the side of the Israelis. And there is no sign that the US is prepared to put any meaningful pressure on Israel to do the right thing, whether the Biden administration or a future Trump administration.
Okay, so there's really a 10,000-foot question in here somewhere. And Yossi, this will go to you. You mentioned earlier that peace happens if both sides want it. Israel's strategy right now is to occupy part of Palestine, the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and to blockade the other part, Gaza. I'm not sure that many people in Israel today would say, apart from the extreme right, okay, because their policy is annexation, settle the land, drive out the Palestinians. They have said as much. We know what they think. Apart from the extreme right, I'm not sure there are that many Israelis who would say this is working for us. Is there a momentum? Is there a critical mass of Israelis who think we need to try something different because occupation and blockading has resulted in this?
No question. No question. I mean, you're seeing the numbers. I mean, there are surveys, ideological surveys and partisan surveys, but you see that Netanyahu himself is very unpopular. I think that he was never so unpopular in his long political career. His party became much smaller in the polls. People do not want to annex the West Bank, for sure not Gaza. So I think that a different government in Israel will be much more relevant for most of the Israelis. And I can tell you about the ICC. In the ICC decision, and I was one of those who wanted Israel to join the ICC in December 2000, but regretfully did not happen. But, and as you may know, it was Israelis and Jews from abroad who were the biggest pushers for the establishment of the ICC. But the ICC problem is that the decision of the prosecutor actually strengthens, at least for a while, Netanyahu. because people, even if they are not admirers of Netanyahu, would not like to see their prime minister in such a situation, mainly because it was actually connected to the accusations against Hamas. Even if it was not equal and the Hamas accusations are more serious, still the fact that both sides, as if it was balanced, were accused, made many Israelis who do not support Netanyahu to support him. So I don't see these things changing the idea. What can change the situation? For example, President Biden has a plan, which is a strategic alliance. It is the release of the hostages. It is a alliance with Saudi Arabia and negotiations on the basis of a Palestinian state. But he leaked it, or his people leaked it, to the New York Times and the Washington Post some months ago. He never actually said it publicly. And I believe that at least for him now to stand up and say this is an American offer to both sides, that might have a much bigger impact on the Israeli public opinion than the sanctions or things like that. I'm not saying that sanctions do not have an impact, but sometimes they are having the counter impact. And I think that thinking about punishments is the wrong way. The right way is to put an option and to see who supports it, and to create, even in Israel itself, a real debate. Today it is difficult to have a debate because the offer of President Biden, or perhaps in the future of the Europeans, is not on the agenda at all.
All right, gentlemen, we have to run. That's all the time we have for today, but I really value your time. Thank you very much for your perspectives and your analysis today. Yossi Berlin, Julian Barnes-Stacy, and Con Ross, thank you for joining us, and thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X, our handle, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Okay. So maliwanag po mga suki, mga kababayan, no?
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
Okay. So, wala tayong oras, sobra-sobra na. Okay. So, ito na po ang atin.
Male voice, valley voice, monster voice, female voice.
So, yan po ang katapusan ng balita natin. Okay, sa umagang ito mga suki, no? Okay. Okay, sa regional by 25 na regional politics, United Bangsamoro Justice Party, dyan po sa Tawi-Tawi, no? Okay, kay Governor Mangs Sali. Ayun, so Basilan, dito sa Basulta at saka Tawi-Tawi under UGB, United Bangsamoros Justice Party, no? And then ang Pona Bayabaw, okay, Marawi City under United Bangsamoro Justice Party, no? At saka Cotabato City. So, yung iba, okay, hati-hati pa yan mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Okay, tumatanggap na raw ng bonus ang DOS. Okay, dato din sensuat. Okay, pamumuno po ni Mayor Dato Lester Sensuat. Okay, may bonus na daw itong Mayo pa, release na po ang bonus mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, yung mid-year bonus. Sa iba kaya? Okay, sa iba, ano nangyari? Ayan po, no? At saka yung kahapon, nung binaril po ng former consular ng Mama Sapano, dyan po sa M. Manor Hotel, mga suki, Cotabato City, no? Daring, okay, kitang-kita po, na-scoop po ng isang media, nagkataon po dyan ng media po na scoop niya, pati yung bumaril po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, pati yung baril. Okay, nakita po baby Armalite ang pagtira po doon sa former council po ng Mama Sapa ng mga suki, na? Okay, so, yan po mga latest balita na kuha natin, no? Ayan. So, tapos na. Pag tapos na, siyempre paalam na po mga suki, na? Okay, paalam ako. Babalik ako mamayang hapon. Okay, sa mga mainit na issue. Okay, na magdulot po ng kaguluhan ng daigdig, no? Okay, apektado lahat tayo dahil po sa mga kaguluhan niya. Okay, hanggang dito po ang programa Consolidated News natin. Okay, sa platform po ng ADLSN TV News Corporation. Okay, sa programa Halo-Halo Special Opinion Balita at iba pa. Kasapi po ng Serbisyo Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan at sa kaugnayan sa mamamayan. Okay. So, hanggang dito na po mga suki. Okay, wala tayong masamang tinapay. Okay, mag-release lang tayo ng balita po para sa lahat, na? Okay. So, shoutout na lang sa inyo lahat. Okay, araw ng Huwebes ba ngayon? 23. Ayan po mga susi. Friday naman bukas. Okay, this has been Abs na mahal lamang po. Okay, salamat sa walang sawang, okay, na kayo subaybay dito sa programa natin, na? Ayan.
Male voice, lolly voice, monster voice, female voice.
Okay, ang Bangko de Oro, no? Malaking bangko po sa buong Pilipinas, pinakamalaking bangko papasok po sa Isabela City, no? Okay, sabi po ng Lepido. Okay, opisina po ng ni Jamju Rivera, no? Okay, papasok daw ang video, ang Universal Bank po ng video, okay, sa Isabela City, no? Ang Islamic Bank kaya ng Bangsamoro government, kailan kaya papasok sa Basilan, no? Okay, ayan, ang Maybank sa Lamitan City, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Kasi ang Isabela City ay hindi sakop po ng BARM. Dapat doon sa Lamitan City. Ayan. Okay, tama na po.